All right. Welcome, everybody. See a lot of new faces here, which is something I really like to see. I'm Mark Weathington. I'm director here at the JCRA Arboretum. Uh, we really love this program. Love seeing new faces. Love seeing new names online. Little bit about the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, in case you're not familiar. And this is designed for new gardeners to the area. So you may not know us. We're part of NC State University. We opened in 1976 when Dr. J.C. Ralston came to NC State. He was tasked with he was teaching nursery management, teaching plant materials courses, and was tasked with helping grow the nursery industry. And there are a lot of ways to do that. You could work on, fertilizer, water use efficiency in plant production, and, shave a few cents off of the plant's cost. And that's a great way to do it. We have great professors who do that kind of thing. But what he had seen, he'd gone around, and everywhere he went, he was seeing people growing the same plants. You went into a garden center, and there were about 40 plants. If you went to another garden center, 40 different types of plants. Went to another garden center, about the same 40 plants. And so he said, if 90% of the plants available in any area are the same 40 plants, how is there room for anybody to come into the industry? How is there room for growth? And so he set out to diversify the American landscape and really pushed plants out to people. There's some nurserymen who tell stories about running to hide when they saw him coming with plants, because he was always trying to get them plants in their hands. And I'll talk a little bit more about him when I get going. The Arboretum still operates in much the same way. Things are a little different now. You can go to a big box store and you see more diversity in that big box store. Not always the healthiest plants, but you see more diversity there than you could in a good garden center 40 years ago. So in a lot of ways, it was very, very successful. But we continue that. We evaluate plants. We try plants. We still send plants out to nurserymen. More now than before, we send plants to breeders to bring in new characteristics to great plants, that sort of thing. And we are free and open. We are still an extension entity. We do research. We do a lot of education like this. And we still connect with the nurserymen. So if you ever and with the public. So if you ever have questions, the master gardeners are fantastic, but IDing things, we love that. Hopefully it isn't something you got from us 30 years ago, because we grow weird things and odd things. And if you want to see and get some of the newest, rarest things, they often come from us. So there's actually a picture of a sign somewhere that says that from JC's time that said, some plants we lost the labels to. We have no idea what they are. They're probably rare and valuable. They are free to take, as long as you swear to never, ever, ever ask us what they are. And I can drive around town and see people's yard, be like, that's a member, or somebody who lived in that house was a member at some point. It's a lot of fun. So we started doing this program, this Gardening in the South, really because we were watching all these people move to Raleigh. And a lot of our membership had been members for a very long time. And so, they kind of knew us, knew what was going on, but we were seeing all these new people come in, and we thought, all these people are coming. They're Long Island, where you can stick your arm in the loam down to your shoulder, the Midwest, all kinds of places. And they may have been great gardeners, but there's some real challenges in gardening here in the Southeast. And there are people who are just getting into gardening. I see some great young people here, which I love to see. And so we really wanted to do this to really introduce people to gardening. And when we were talking about it immediately, our partner here and board member Basil Camus with Leaf and Limb Tree Company said, we want to sponsor this. We want people to be successful gardeners. And part of that gardening is trees. And we're often dealing with trees and gardening under them. And Basil he's just fantastic. His whole company, Leaf and Limb, all about trees, their health, the need for more trees, and what they do for us. I've said it, for all of you here and online, get their newsletter, check them out. There's a lot of tree companies that are fantastic. There are a lot of tree companies, often the cheapest ones, who, if you call them out to look at a tree, they'll say, yep, got to come down, because that's how they get their money. Basil will come in and say, we can save this tree. Let's work on saving this tree and not just getting it out. And so really their newsletter is amazing. I love to read it. I send it around to my staff because they've got great things to say. So definitely stop by, talk to them, sign up for their newsletter. Those of you online can go to their website, leaflimb.com. There's no end, leaflimb.com, and you can sign up as well. Couple other things about the Arboretum. This is a free program. We love having you here. We are of NC State. We're in the horticultural science department, but we are not funded by the university. The two salaries that the Arboretum funds are mine as director and our housekeeper. And I'll tell you what, I go collect plants in Asia for 3 weeks at a time in the fall often, and if our housekeeper is sick for a day, they have to send somebody else in to replace her. So kind of says the relative importance of both of us. But I have an amazing staff, which is why I can disappear and not do anything. And that staff is all supported through here. So memberships, gifts, rentals, all those kinds of things are really critically important for us. So if you like what you see here and you're not a member, consider it. If you are a member, make sure you tell people about this kind of program. One thing we do, we have a shirt every year. And this is our new shirt. We just brought it in. And for those of you who are new, the necessary is our bathroom. And we are very proud of the fact that we are the only botanic garden who would put their bathroom on their T-shirt. So if you go out in the garden and you have it here, it's at the far end of our perennial border. It is an icon here. And it is necessary. Somebody else said, who didn't know what the necessary was, who was here, said, "Oh, we thought you were saying that the sunlight and the water and the plants and the soil were necessary." And of course, that's what we were saying when we were doing this and naming it. But it's very cool. It was built by students for a flower show and then transported here and built into a bathroom. So go visit our necessary. It's beautiful. All right. I'm also going to talk about some of the other events we have here when we get into it. But I just want to say we're really happy to have y'all all here. It's really exciting. We are a public garden. We teach a graduate course in public horticulture administration. This is important to us. And there's two public garden. There's the garden, but there's the public. And we've really, over the last couple of years, we've really missed having people around and having people here. It's been really hard for staff, and we've tried to make up for it. Those of you who maybe this is how you heard of it, we have a weekly, every Wednesday, 3:00. We have a weekly program that is free. It's a Zoom program. It's not in person. It's all Zoom, and great topics, great guests in how-tos, deep dives in plants. And I'm really proud of the fact that our whole team, it said when we started opening back up, they all said, hey, it's critical that we keep doing this because as an extension entity, it's not about our garden and what happens here. Just like with JC trying to get those plants out, it's not about what's inside our gates. It's about what we bring outside, what we teach people, what we get out. And so when we're getting, 150, 200 people every week on Zoom for our midweek programs, we have to, our staff was like, we got to keep doing that. Yes. As I was staff member scratching our heads and looking at trying to figure out how to open our parking lot gate, which wouldn't open for us, I was getting calls from the back gate where Arlene, associate director, was saying, I can't get in the back gate. And we came in and we had no power at all. So we're in good shape. We've got lights and some power projectors. We're all using our own personal phones as hotspots around the room for the computers. So Zoom folks, we're going to try and keep our phones charged and keep you online, but just bear with us. It's also affecting the heat controls in here. So those of you at home, good choice maybe. But we are trying. So really do hope we don't make people too uncomfortable here. And we'll have breaks and we have plenty of ice water as well. So I want to go ahead and get started on our program. This gardening in the South. This is something that is really important to me as I said, as a public horticulture entity. This is really important to me. I want people to be successful. Thank you. What's that? You need that one on. All right.
There you go.
That's.
Yeah. It's a little hard to see. Yeah.
I'd rather not see me and be able to see the screen. Can we do?
You can see online if she cuts the light.
They can see the screen.
That's true.
All right. Are they online? Is there people being able to see the screen?
I think the screen is shared, so the only thing is they just can't see you in the corner.
All right, that works. Y'all good, Blake? All right. Thank you. I swear it has gotten more and more difficult as we've gone on. That may be because we're trying to do more and more, but nobody needs to see me. They've seen me before, probably. So, Blake, you told me I was working. Oh. I may have to sit in somebody's lap. I think I might have to get close is the issue. Well, hey, nobody can see me anyway, so maybe I can. Oh, Mark is my name. All right. I don't want to get in everybody's way. So I mentioned that JC really made a change. He really helped diversify the American landscape, as the saying is. And this, in 2004, Horticulture Magazine commissioned this painting, A Heavenly Garden Party. I like to tell those of you who are great gardeners, be glad you're not in this picture because you had to be dead to be in it. But this is the 25 most important gardeners as Horticulture Magazine saw it. And so depending on your knowledge of horticulture, you may know some of these people. If you like roses, there's Graham Stewart Thomas, Asa Gray, who did the herbarium at Arnold Arboretum, Harvard University, Ernest Chinese Wilson, who was a great plant explorer. You have here in North Carolina, Elizabeth Lawrence, and of course, Thomas Jefferson. There's no greater service you can do your country than to introduce a new plant. And right here, it wasn't in the front with Gertrude Jekyll, but right here is J.C. Ralston. He was important enough to be in full color, at least. And it's hard to see on here, perhaps, but if you look real closely, in his hands, he's got a pair of pruners. And he's kind of bent over, like he's snipping something. And JC was absolutely famous, infamous, notorious of liberating cuttings wherever he went. And in fact, I'm told, I don't know if this is true, maybe apocryphal, that JC was for a while persona non grata at Kew Gardens for liberating some cuttings, which is pretty rich if you've ever read any of the history of Kew Gardens. They literally, under cover of night, smuggled rubber trees out of Brazil to bring to India. It is like something out of Mission Impossible, what they did to do that. So it's kind of rich when they decide that JC shouldn't be getting his cuttings of a boxwood or something like that. But you can see he really made a difference and really inspired people, which is nice for me because I get invited to do things like about this time next month, I'm giving a talk in Australia about the role of botanic gardens in conservation. And they're not looking for Mark Weathington. They're looking for the director of the J.C. Ralston Arboretum because of our reputation. Blake, I'm gonna have to just give you a heads up when you switch. Sorry. So the Arboretum, we test plants, we evaluate them, we try to do it in a really beautiful way, which next. You can just go through these next. We have gardens and collections, and really always just trying to make a beautiful space. So, part of the genesis of this program was we put out a book called Gardening in the South that was really about how to garden. And the purpose of that, the reason wanted to write that is because so much of the information, even the stuff for the South, was written by people who still believed all the stuff they had been told about gardening in England or gardening in New England. And it just didn't apply to us in the South. It was just that was passed down, and it doesn't work for us. The other thing, a lot of that stuff in those old things really kind of presupposed that there was somebody full time in the garden. That's how we gardened. That there was the woman of the house there to garden all day, to go out and do things, or there was somebody being paid to garden or something. And it was just so difficult that how they made it gardening. It seemed hard. And I've found that there are, in everything, there are these gatekeepers who want you to think that things are more difficult than they actually are. Gardening's easy. Plants want to live. They really do. I mean, we do the best we can to kill them, but they want to live. Go ahead, click. So, traditionally, this is what people think of gardening in the South, right? My grandmother would have said this is fancy gardening. They got I always wonder if they were so good, they painted the tire and they were so good at picking out their bulbs that they got the perfect match, or they waited until that tulip started showing color and then went and, got that tire perfect. But they got it, right? But that's gardening in the South. That's what it used to be. And it used to be we got the dregs of whatever they were breeding up north. If it would grow here, we could grow it. But now all the work's being done in the South. There are so many breeders and growers who are in the South who are getting great plants because we're growing in here in North Carolina. I got to give up on this. Click. So I have a confession to make. I am a lazy gardener. There's a reason now that I went from being a gardener to being in charge of gardeners to being in a corner office in air conditioning sometimes. I love plants. I love plants so deeply. I want to be surrounded by plants. I don't want to spend all my time gardening. I like being with the plants, not necessarily dealing with the plants. And I do have a pretty good sized garden at home. growing quickly. And I do like the gardening sometimes. Spring and fall, not necessarily right now. But I want to be able to relax in my garden. That's something I want. And so that's really when I think about gardening in the South, I'm like, let's be realistic about what we're doing. So the most important thing, and Amanda, who's a great extension agent, who'll be talking next, would say this, Basil, any of our staff would tell you that the most important thing is the soil. If you've got $100 to spend on your garden, spend $100 on soil, and then beg, borrow, and do a JC on plants to fill it. So, how many people have seen something like this? Right? So this is critical to make compost, right? You start on the first layer, you have sticks, 4 to 6 inches, and then a layer of brown, dried leaves, green, brown, green. Always cover with a brown layer. Keep as wet as a wrung out sponge. Keep covered. This type of thing has done a greater disservice to more people than anything else in terms of composting. You know what's not complicated? Composting. You know what plants do naturally? They break down. This is ridiculous. I don't know about you, but I don't get alternate layers of stuff out of my garden in green and brown. I don't, people who, I know there are people out there who are gardeners who buy plants and then they keep them beside their house and water them while they try and figure out what they're going to do with them because they didn't have a plan when they bought them, which is me, not having a plan. I don't keep them in pots. I stick them in the ground. I don't mind moving plants later. I'll dig them up and move them. I've been digging up and moving plants this month. It's fine if you can keep them watered. But I don't water plants. I don't grow plants in nice containers because I don't water plants. The idea of me watering a compost pile is ridiculous. You know what happens if your compost pile gets dry? It stops composting. When it gets wet again, it'll start again. Here's all you need to know about compost is you pile your stuff up. When you get started, if it's a new compost pile, throw a couple shovelfuls of soil in there because you need to have all those little microbes and everything to break things down. Just keep piling stuff up until it gets big enough that you don't want to pile it up anymore and then start a new one. If you go out and it smells like ammonia, then that means it's stopped composting. It needs air in there. It's going anaerobic. And then you just kind of, fork it over to another pile to turn it over a little bit. That's all you need to know. You can water it if you want. You can not water it. It doesn't matter. Here's other little dirty secret about compost. In your average garden, you can compost and you're not going to get much of anything. You'll get very little compost. Don't feel bad about, sending it to the city. You can go buy compost from the city. Next. Here's the other little dirty secret. This is good compost. I talk to people and they say, I compost. I've got a lot of compost. It breaks down, but it's not compost. Unless you are industrial size and you are putting things into big rows and turning it and watering it and doing all this stuff. And then before selling it, you're putting it through big sifters to get everything that still looks like a plant out of it. And you get that beautiful, crumbly black compost. Unless you're doing that, your compost will always look like it was plants at one time. It's okay. Carbon is carbon. That's what you're doing. You're putting that carbon and nitrogen back in there. Next. Carbon's carbon. Doesn't matter where you are. I grew up in Prince George County, South Central Virginia. You could get peanut holes out the yin yang. They were great. You mulch them, they break down. It's great. They're expensive now. But, if you're in Maine, there, next. If you're near Smithfield, Virginia, whatever, it's all about that carbon. Next. So another great thing, this is something I learned from another local great gardener around here. Does anybody know what this is? You can see it's wintertime. Anybody know what this is? These are tillage radishes. Next. Tillage radishes. What does that look like? Daikon radish? Tillage radishes. This is this old thing. You sow them in the fall. You can sow them right under trees. You can sow them in existing beds with other plants there in that heavy clay soil we have, which, going back to soil, red clay, if you're new to the area, red clay is awesome. Red clay is so nutrient rich. You get a little bit of organic matter in there to break it up a little bit. It's perfect. I will take red clay over white clay, over sand, over anything. But no matter what, organic matter is what's important. But you sow these seeds. Now, buy tillage radish seeds, because if you buy daikon radish seeds, which are the exact same things, you'll spend 10 times as much. You scatter them out, kind of rough up the soil a little bit, scatter them out before it's going to rain, let them go, and they form these big roots under there. And you can harvest some of them, but really you just leave them there. You can mow down the tops, leave them in the soil, and they break down. But whether you harvest them or not, those roots break up that heavy clay soils. They'll go through hard pans if it's a shallow enough hard pan. They're amazing what they do. I have just become enamored with using these things to really deal with things. Because the hardest, it's easy when somebody says, oh, till compost into your soil. But most of us have either started planting immediately before we had the time, energy, money to really get a lot of compost in, or we've moved into a place that was already existing and we don't want to rip everything out. That's what I did. I moved into a new house. I ripped everything out. But this is great. And you can't really do it under evergreen shade. So pines, like over the winter, they don't really do well. But like under deciduous trees that lose their leaves, you can still sow these out, and they don't do quite as good a job, but they do pretty well. But it's amazing what that'll do. Next. And then you mulch. Now, people want mulch that lasts a long, long time, right? Because they don't want to mulch again. It's expensive, it's tiring, but mulch helps build your soil. I had a boss who wanted me to use rubber mulch in a rose garden because it was so expensive. We had 3,000 roses. This was another botanic garden. And we did it all with pine straw. But part of the deal was we raked out all that pine straw, and I'll talk about this later on today, and replaced it every year. And he wanted me to use the ground up tires, the rubber mulch in there. And I was like, no, we want mulch. We use partially decomposed leaves here. One, because they're free, and I mentioned we don't get any money. But two, because they break down. We want our mulch to break down because it builds soil, and it will build soil over time. If you can't mix compost in, you can put compost on the top of the soil, and it will break down over time. It'll leach in, those humates get in there and will help loosen your soil. And it's all about soil. Next. It helps that we have volunteers. Now, more mulch is not better mulch. This is a little bit too much. So, you can tell you're reading something from up north if they say that you are mulching for winter protection. Now, we grow some things here that we shouldn't grow because it's too cold for us, and some mulch will help protect a plant when it gets very cold. And you hear people from the north talk about mulching to prevent frost heaving, where the ground pushes up when it freezes. We don't have that. It doesn't happen. We're the South. We are mulching for moisture retention and weed prevention. If any of you have ever traveled and looked at gardens in England, they don't mulch. They have these little polite little British weeds that poke up, and they go out with a little scuffle hoe, they call it, and they do a little of this for about 15 minutes, and they're done with weeds. Down here, we have weeds that if you don't take care of them this weekend, next weekend, you got to call in Basil with a chainsaw to come and take them out. So more mulch better, right? No. Obviously, you're not mulching like this, because this is what happens when you mulch your trees is you get this kind of thing. But what you want in mulch, so there's two kinds of weeds, just like there's two kinds of everything, right? They're annual weeds and perennial weeds. Annual weeds A lot of them come up. They come up quickly. They go to seed quickly. They spread that seed. All that seed will come up. Perennial weeds will come back year after year after year and take a little bit more work. So annual weeds, all you want to do, those are quick successional plants in the ecological terms. All they need is some sunlight to germinate. So you want to make sure there's no sunlight. If you are using a pretty fine mulch, you can go very shallow, inch and a half. If you're using like big old pine bark chunks, that I don't know if they do those anymore, but you got to go pretty thick because you can get sunlight through there, and it's all about sunlight getting in there. Now, if you go too thick with like your finer medium mulches, the seeds will just germinate in that. But here's the other piece. If you go too thick, the water can't get through. So you don't get water down where you need it, and it isn't retained. But if you do it, say 2 inches on average with your mulch, 1.5 inches to 2 inches, what happens is water can move through your mulch. And then if you've ever done that science experiment with a kid where you have a fine material and a coarse material, or a coarse material and a fine material, and you pour water in there, no matter whether it's coarse on top or on bottom, where it hits that different layer, the water tends to stop. Now it'll keep going through eventually. So you get a big rainfall and it goes through that mulch and it wants to stop right there. You get a layer of water there. So your soil stays moisture there where you want it, because you don't have sun to germinate those weeds. Now, if you have perennial weeds and the kind that you come back again and again and again, you got to pull those out. You got to spray them. You got to do something like that to get rid of them. But once you get rid of them, if you're blocking sunlight, new seeds of it won't germinate. So that's really the key on mulching, is shallow enough to let the water come through easily and lock it in, thick enough that sunlight doesn't get through. And it doesn't matter what mulch, you can always kind of keep that in your mind. Next. It's like all bad gardening practices. That's the real invasive thing, is bad gardening practices. Okay. Plants. Plants are expensive, right? So I know there are a lot of us who go to the nursery, go to the big box store, go wherever, and you go past all the beautiful plants and flowers. You say, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? And you go to that back corner behind the piles of black pots and, broken statuary, and you got the scratch and dent sale. And you buy this plant. And you're being a good gardener, right? You got this plant for $5, $100 plant. And you brag to your friends about how cheap you got this plant, and you plant it, and you do it all right. You've mulched the soil. You keep it watered. You do the everything you need to do. Good compost, and the tree lives because you're taking care of it. And you're like, oh, it's established. I don't need to keep watering it. It's fine. And it lives, and then it dies. And you say, I'm a bad gardener. That's a bad plant. That's a bad nursery. I don't know what I'm doing. And the fact is, you bought crap. How many other times in life do you go and say, hey, you got anything really crappy in here? Because that's what I want to buy. That's what I want to buy. On the car lot, you got lemons? I want the lemon. I don't want something that's reliable. And but this plant, don't buy this plant. People say, but plants are so expensive, right? All right. What other things besides a house do you buy that will get better with age, provide more value to your home, provide pleasure year round than a plant? Plants are not expensive. To get say a 3-gallon, good size flowering shrub, that takes years, literal years, 2, 3, 4 years to grow to get to that. And during that 2, 3, 4 years, the nurseryman will move it 25 times, because there's nothing nurserymen like more than moving plants around, or telling their employees, like me when I was young, to move plants around. They have to water it. They have to fertilize it. They have to trim it back. They have to make sure the bugs don't get on it. There is a lot of work involved. Imagine if your car took 3 years to build, and somebody had to have hands on it basically every day, how much would your car cost? It'd be millions. And then people look at a 3-gallon shrub and say, ooh, $35, $50. That's so expensive. And yes, that plant might die. But on average, the plants will live. More plants will live than will die when you bring them home if you give them even a little bit of attention. And people, I don't know if there are a lot of folks who know winter daphne, evergreen shrub, intensely fragrant and beautiful flowers in the middle of winter, doesn't get big, stays low. Well, unless it gets real old, but it doesn't usually get real old for us. It lives, 4 or 5, 8 years. Somebody was just telling me about their 10-year-old Daphne around here. And people say, oh, it only lives 5 years. It's so expensive. I'm like, are you kidding me? 5 years, pay $50 for this plant? 5 years, $10 a year, $50, you will go to Dead Lobster, eat a bad meal, spend $50 and not think twice about it. But this plant that's going to live for 5 years and be amazing is too expensive for you. It's crazy. And that's one that we know is going to die for us here in the Southeast. And when mine dies after 5 years, I get another one and I plant it because it's an amazing plant. But people say they're expensive, but these are things that are going to live for ages. Shit, I don't plant annuals because I'm lazy. But people go and buy flats of pansies and spend $50, $100 on them. And they're going to die. They're guaranteed to only last you 1 year. And yet this other plant is too expensive. Plants are too cheap. They are just way too cheap. Go ahead, next. So planting a plant. I got this because it drove me so crazy. Dig a hole 2 feet deep, fill the bottom with peat moss and pour in a bucket of water. No. You should put compost in and amend an entire bed, or don't amend it at all when you're planting a plant. You amend a bed, never a hole. What you're doing, remember what I talked about the mulch, 2 different textures? When you amend the hull with something, and definitely not peat moss, because peat moss, when it dries out, is hydrophobic. You can't get water back into it. So never peat moss. But what you do is you dig out the hole, dig it wider, don't dig it deeper. You don't want really deep. Roots go wide, not deep. So you go the depth of whatever you're planting, you go wider. You knock your plant out of the pot. If it's really root bound, you cut those roots. Be ruthless. Ruthless. Tear them up. Now, if they're not root bound, if it's not, this whole web of roots around there, you don't have to do that. I usually will scratch around a little bit, put it in there, and then backfill with that existing soil and pack it in there. You don't want, if you leave a lot of airspace between the root ball you're putting in and the existing soil, it will dry out and then it will die. What you want to do is backfill it, pack it in. If it's a larger plant, I will get it halfway and I'll pack it in and then I'll put more in. I'll step on top of the root ball and kind of do a little dance on there. All the things will tell you not to do that. I usually plant things and water them once. And I plant, because of the job I have, I don't have time spring and fall. I plant in the middle of winter and middle of summer. I water plants one time when they go in. I don't rely on sprinklers. I don't rely on the rain to water it in. I water it in with a hose and I water it in. But unless we're having a serious drought, I don't water again generally. And my plants live. And there's nothing special about what I'm doing. And that's even in my woodlands where I didn't do any composting and I'm going into the native soil. So you want good contact between the root ball and the soil. You want to amend beds, not holes. Don't fall for that. Would you like fries with that? Don't get that soil conditioner, the whatever. You don't need it. All you're doing is making a bucket. You've got the soil that the plant was grown in. You've got this soil that you've amended with some kind of soil conditioner, and then you've got your native soil, and the water will just sit there, and either your plant will dry out or it'll drown. That's what you look at. So don't do that. It's easier than you think. It's cheaper than you think if you're not buying all that extra stuff. Next. So the last bit I'll tell you is people who want a vegetable garden, and I don't. We got a great farmer's market. I don't have the room for ugly vegetables. But people who want to start vegetable garden, they're like, this is what I want. I want a potager. I want this beautiful thing that I can stroll through and pluck tomatoes off the vine. Worst thing you can do as a new gardener, and this goes with ornamentals too, is go overboard. Next. Do this. Find a little spot. Plant some tomatoes. You may realize you hate dealing with them. You may realize you love dealing with them. If you love them, expand. Really think about doing something. But it's Mark Twain said, "I distrust any enterprise that requires new clothes." It's the difference between me and my wife. My wife does not garden, but if both of us decide we're going to start biking, I will put on a pair of cargo shorts and a t-shirt and get on my old bike that I've had forever. Get new tires because they're dry rotted, and I'll go to see if I'm going to like it. If I can do it for months, then hey, yeah, maybe I'll invest some stuff. She's got to get the gear. Get the gear, look good. Get the new bike because gosh, her old bike's heavy, and we can get a titanium one for that'll never break riding down the road, and is lighter and all. And we may both give up in a month, and now we've got a really nice titanium bike to hang from the roof of the garage. So start small. Next. And you don't have to have this. This is for showing off. This is for at a garden, a public garden, or for somebody who is paying somebody else to take care of their garden. Next. This is what your greens should look like. You seed them out. Now they tell you got to thin them. Thinning them is just pulling out a bunch of them, twisting off the roots and throwing them in for salad. Those are spring greens. Those are the ones that you spend a lot of money on at the grocery store. And then after you thin them out, they can get bigger, and you can harvest them as they get bigger and bitterer. But you don't have to have them in neat little rows. You don't have to make life difficult for yourself. Next. So I'm going to end here. We're, like I said, we'll take questions at the end. I want to turn it over to Amanda Wilkins, and we're going to do a quick handover. I'm going to turn on a light so you can actually see her for when she comes up.